So can you explain quickly for the home viewers what the difference is between a top fermenting and a bottom fermenting yeast?
Well, there are only two different kinds of beer in the world. One is an ale, one is a lager, and they're two different, it's just basically a type of yeast. Now, with the lager, it ferments at a much colder temperature, so the yeast, when it's cruising around and eating all these sugars that we made over there in the mash tun, it's doing it much more meticulously and much more slowly, so it's not producing as many flavors, essentially. So you have, lagers tend to be much more crisp, much more clean. And because it's fermenting colder, the yeast generally tends to hang out at the bottom of the tank, and that's what they mean by bottom fermenting. Now with ales ferment at room temperature. You know, I mean, we ferment right around 70 degrees. So this ale yeast, they call it top fermenting because it's up the top and it's cruising around, just chugging away. And as a result of the rapid fermentation, it's spewing out all these chemical compounds, you know, like esters and phenols and whatnot, which equate to flavors. So ales, the top fermenters, generally tend to be a little more fruity, whereas the colder bottom fermenting lagers tend to be much more crisp and clean. Now within those two kinds of beers, you can make anything. You can make a light lager, you can also make a double bond, which is just a really, really strong, you know, dark German beer. You can have all kinds of different flavors in there, but they will all have a very crisp, clean finish if they're a lager. With an ale, they tend to be a little more fruity.
So what are we looking at right here right now?
So this is when we cool down the wort coming out of the kettle, and we pump it into one of these guys, which is a fermentation tank. You can always recognize them by their conical bottom. The cool down wort will be introduced to the yeast. The yeast is just, we're basically yeast farmers. The yeast recognizes it has a huge food source and starts eating them. And as I said, as the yeast, like little Pac-Man, are cruising across and eating all of the sugars, the sugar content drops, obviously, and all the byproducts of fermentation increase. And the two major ones are alcohol, and the other one is CO2. But because this is a sterile environment, because right now we're breathing all kinds of microorganisms, we don't want anything to live inside our beer besides the yeast that we want. So we have to have a sealed environment. Now that being said, if we're producing CO2, the CO2 needs to have a way to escape.
Right.
So what we do is we have a chemically treated water inside a bucket and a little blow-off hose. So that right there is the CO2 that's being produced by the extremely happy yeast in here that's chowing down.